What would you do if your baby was burning with fever, the nearest hospital miles away, and no one answered your cries for help? No money, no car, just the sheer force of a mother's will, and a last-ditch run to the gates of a ranch owned by a man who had locked himself away from the world. That's how Sofia's story began. Barefoot, desperate, carrying her child like a prayer. She never expected the man behind that gate to become anything more than a stranger. But sometimes, the people we're meant to find are the ones we meet in our worst hour. And sometimes, love doesn't knock. It crashes in when everything else is falling apart. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about second chances, healing after heartbreak, and the kind of love that builds you back. One small, stubborn miracle at a time. Before we begin, I want you to picture this. A young mother, barefoot and breathless, running across a gravel road with her feverish baby in her arms, knowing every second might be the last. No money, no hospital, no one answering her calls for help, until she pounds on the wooden gates of the richest ranch in town, begging for mercy. What happened next would not only save a life, but reshape 3 others in ways no one could have predicted. This is not just a story about desperation. It's about the people we become when life leaves us no other choice. And it's about the man who could have shut the door, but opened his heart instead. That mother's name was Sofia Rivera, and her daughter, Isla, was only 8 months old the night it all began. The sun had just started to sink behind the distant fields of Pine Hollow, casting the village in hues of dusty gold and the faint chill of oncoming rain. But Sofia barely noticed. All she felt was the terrifying weight of the child in her arms, too hot to the touch, whimpering with a rasp that pierced her to the bone. Isla's breath came in short, strained bursts, her tiny lips dry, her skin slick with fevered sweat. Sofia had wrapped her daughter in the thinnest blanket they owned, but it did nothing against the cold. Her own tears blurred the path ahead, but she kept moving, clutching the baby tighter, whispering broken promises. "You're not leaving me. Not tonight. Not ever." The problem was, Pine Hollow didn't have a hospital or a clinic, just a tiny general store, a post office that closed at 4 p.m., and a chapel with peeling white paint. The nearest doctor was 20 miles away, and Sofia had no car, no family, and barely enough food to last the week. Her late husband had died in a logging accident just months after Isla's birth, and since then, every day had been about survival. But tonight wasn't about surviving. Tonight was about saving a life. Then she remembered the Monroe Ranch. Everyone in town knew it, the largest stretch of land in the county, owned by Caleb Monroe, a reclusive and rugged cattleman whose wealth only seemed to make him more of a mystery. Sofia had never spoken to him, only seen him from a distance, checking fence lines, walking between the barns, his posture upright, purposeful. But now, he was her only hope. She sprinted down the dirt path, her bare feet bloodied on the sharp gravel. The world narrowed to a tunnel, just the sound of her daughter's fading breath and the frantic pounding of her own heart. Finally, the heavy wooden gate came into view, carved with a single M in the center. She slammed her fists against it. "Please, somebody help me. My baby, she's burning up. Please, anyone." For a moment, nothing. Only wind, only her own sobbing echoing back at her. And then, footsteps. Fast, firm. The gate creaked open, and there stood Caleb Monroe, taller than she remembered, dressed in a worn flannel shirt with sleeves rolled up to weathered forearms, his eyes the color of moss and thunderclouds. He looked down, saw the infant in her arms, and his face changed. "Inside," he said, without a second of hesitation. "Now." Sofia tried to speak, but her voice failed. Caleb took one look at Isla's flushed face, her limp limbs, and immediately turned. Truck. Hospital. Go. He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask what she was doing on his land. He just acted. And that's the thing people rarely talk about. Sometimes heroes don't arrive in uniforms or speeches. Sometimes they arrive with a firm jawline and a truck that doesn't stall in the cold. Sofia climbed in, clutching Isla against her chest, whispering prayers through her sobs. The truck tore through the night, engine growling, headlights bouncing off the trees. "Is she breathing?" Caleb asked, eyes locked on the road. "Barely," Sofia managed. "I've never seen her like this. I don't know what to do." Her voice broke, and for a second, so did his. "We're gonna get her there," he said. "She's going to make it. I promise." And that's when she asked the question that had been burning in her throat since the moment he opened that gate. "Why are you helping me?" The answer came in a voice lower than thunder and steadier than steel. "Because no one helped me when I needed it. And I'll never let that happen to someone else again." The drive to the hospital felt longer than any road Sofia had ever taken, even though Caleb's truck tore through the countryside like it had been waiting its whole life to make this run. Trees became blurs, the sky darkened to a cold blue, and rain streaked across the windshield like tears from a god who had seen enough. Inside the cab, there was only the low growl of the engine, the shallow wheeze of Isla's breath, and Sofia's whispered pleas to anyone, anything, that might still be listening. "Just hold on, baby girl. Just hold on." Caleb didn't speak, but his grip on the wheel told her everything. Knuckles white, jaw clenched, eyes flicking from the road to the mirror where he kept watching the child. This wasn't a man just being a good neighbor. There was something deeper, something he was outrunning. And Sofia noticed. "She's all I have," she said finally, not looking at him. "My husband. He died last winter. A tree came down on the crew. He didn't make it. I was 6 months pregnant. I thought I could do it on my own." Her voice cracked. "I can't." She didn't expect a response, but what Caleb said next stunned her. "You shouldn't have had to." 4 words. But in them, a world. A shared understanding between people who had lost too much and kept going anyway. The hospital was still miles away when Isla's breathing hitched, a sound so fragile, so wrong, that Sofia's heart skipped. "She's not making noise anymore," she said, panic rising. Caleb floored the gas. "Keep her talking. Whisper to her. Let her know you're there." Sofia leaned close, pressing her lips to her daughter's burning forehead. "I'm here, baby. You're not alone. You're not going anywhere, do you hear me? Mommy's here. Please just hold on a little longer." And then, lights. The hospital entrance appeared like a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. Caleb didn't park. He skidded to a stop so violently the truck rocked sideways. He was out in seconds, pulling open Sofia's door, lifting her and Isla both into his arms like they weighed nothing. Sofia didn't even register it. She was too busy watching for signs, any signs, that Isla was still fighting. Nurses rushed forward with a stretcher. The automatic doors flew open. Medical staff poured in like a wave. One nurse touched Caleb's arm. "Sir, you need to wait outside." "Not a chance," he said. "I'm staying with them." Sofia tried to speak, to say thank you, to say something that made sense, but her voice was gone. She could only clutch her daughter's tiny hand and watch as strangers in scrubs pulled tubes and monitors and whispered numbers like spells. "Severe fever," a doctor muttered. heart rate unstable, breathing compromised. She's not crying. That's not good. Sofia stood frozen in place as they wheeled Isla away. When the elevator doors closed, she collapsed. Her knees hit tile. Her hands covered her face. And that's when Caleb stepped in, not as a stranger, but as someone who understood the weight of helplessness. He crouched beside her, one arm wrapped around her shoulders. "She's not gone," he said. "You hear me? You don't give up until it's over." That was the first moment Sofia didn't feel like she was drowning alone. Because Caleb didn't offer her comfort, he offered her presence. That's what people don't tell you. When your world collapses, you don't need answers. You need someone who won't walk away from the wreckage. Minutes passed, then an hour. Sofia sat slumped in a plastic chair, staring at the wall, dry-mouthed and empty. Caleb never left. He stood by the wall, arms folded, silent, like a soldier waiting for orders. When the doctor finally emerged, his face unreadable, Sofia's body went cold. "We performed an emergency drainage procedure," he began. "There was fluid in her lungs. We believe the infection started as something minor, an ear or throat issue, but it spread fast. She was on the edge of septic shock." Sofia couldn't breathe. "But," the doctor nodded, "she's stable. The surgery was successful. We're keeping her under observation, but your daughter's going to be okay." The air collapsed in Sofia's lungs. She sobbed so hard she shook. The pain, the panic, the fear, released all at once. She crumpled forward, her arms around herself. Caleb stepped closer. Sofia reached out blindly and clutched his hand. "You saved her," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "You did. You ran. You fought. You didn't quit. I just drove the truck." But that wasn't true. She knew it. He knew it. And from that moment on, nothing between them would be the same again. Hospitals are strange places. They're full of noise and yet quiet in all the wrong ways. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on tile, the distant murmur of someone crying. It all blends into a pressure that seems to wrap around your chest and never let go. Sofia sat in one of those cheap plastic chairs in the waiting room, knees pulled to her chest, the hollow aftermath of adrenaline leaving her shaking and small. Her daughter, Isla, lay in a room on the 3rd floor under constant monitoring. And the only thing keeping Sofia upright was the fact that she'd heard the word stable. Not cured, not safe, just stable. But that word, for her, was a lifeline. Caleb sat nearby, not talking, not pacing, just there. His presence was silent but massive, like the stillness before a storm that somehow reassures more than it threatens. Sofia had been alone since the funeral, since the last shovel of dirt fell over the coffin and everyone disappeared. She wasn't used to having someone stay past the crisis, but Caleb hadn't left. "You didn't have to stay," she said, voice barely audible, eyes locked on the floor. He turned slightly, not surprised by the question. "I know." Silence stretched again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of what neither of them could say yet. Then he spoke. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Her name was Lila. She got sick. It wasn't dramatic, just fast." Sofia looked up, startled. This wasn't something she'd asked to hear, but the weight in his voice made her listen. "I brought her in too late," Caleb continued. "Didn't think it was serious, thought I could handle it. By the time we got here, there wasn't anything they could do." Sofia's eyes softened. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't need to. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was building a bridge. "So when I saw you at the gate, holding her," he said, voice cracking just slightly, "I saw myself. A second chance to do something right." Sofia's throat tightened. She hadn't cried in front of many people, not even at the funeral. But now, she looked at this man, rough, guarded, grieving, and something in her cracked open. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. "I had no plan. I just ran." "And you ran to the right place," he said, "whether you meant to or not." That night, a nurse came down with an update. Isla was improving. Her breathing had stabilized. The fever had come down. She would need a few days of care, but she was past the danger. Sofia broke down, not with panic this time, but with exhaustion. She let her body sink against the wall, hands trembling, tears streaming silently. And again, Caleb didn't speak. He simply sat beside her, not touching, not explaining, just staying. The next morning, the doctor cleared Sofia to visit the pediatric wing. She walked into the room like she was approaching a sacred altar. Isla was asleep, an IV in her tiny arm, a monitor gently pulsing on the screen beside her. Sofia sat by her side, reached out, and brushed a curl off her baby's forehead. "You did it, little one," she whispered. "You stayed." Caleb stood in the doorway, watching, arms crossed. There was something different in his expression now, not just concern, but reverence. He didn't see a scared single mom anymore. He saw someone who had fought through hell and brought her daughter back. When she turned to look at him, eyes shining with both love and fatigue, he nodded toward the hallway. "Come on," he said. "You're not going home alone in that condition. Not with her so fragile. You're coming back to the ranch." "Caleb," she began, but he cut her off with a look. "It's not charity. It's not pity. It's just what's right. And maybe that's what trust really is. Not about grand gestures, but about knowing someone won't leave once the crisis ends." Because for the first time in a long time, Sofia realized she didn't want to walk back into that world alone. And Caleb? He wasn't offering a favor. He was opening a door neither of them knew had been closed for far too long. The road back to the Monroe Ranch wasn't paved with ease. It was gravel, cracked, winding, and in every sense, symbolic. Sofia sat in the passenger seat of Caleb's truck, her body sore from days in a hospital chair. Isla asleep in her arms with a pacifier half lodged between her lips and a pink blanket tucked tightly around her chest. It should have felt awkward, returning to a stranger's home with no plan, no money, and nothing but a bag with formula and 2 changes of clothes. But it didn't, because Caleb wasn't a stranger anymore. He was something else, something undefined but solid, and that alone was enough for now. The silence between them was peaceful, punctuated only by the occasional bump in the road and the soft hum of tires on dirt. Caleb's hands stayed firm on the wheel, but his glances, brief, careful, told Sofia everything. He wasn't just driving. He was watching her, watching Isla, watching to make sure they made it through. When the truck crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Sofia's breath caught. She had seen it before from afar, but never like this. The farmhouse wasn't opulent, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. Wide, pale wooden beams framed a broad porch with rocking chairs that swayed in the breeze. Sunlight fell across flower beds that bloomed with lavender, daisies, and marigolds, planted not for show, but for peace. Beyond that, rolling fields stretched toward the mountains. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "Most people don't," Caleb replied, his voice calm. "Looks like solitude, but it's more like sanctuary." He parked beside the porch and climbed out, walking around the front of the truck with practiced ease. He didn't ask if she needed help. He simply opened her door and extended his arms, gently taking Isla so Sofia could climb out more easily. That gesture, so small, so instinctive, was the first time someone had lifted a burden from her in months. Inside, the house smelled like cedar wood and coffee. The walls were lined with books, framed photographs, and the kind of wear that only happens when a home is actually lived in. Caleb showed her the guest room, freshly made bed, windows cracked to let in air, a handmade quilt that looked like it had survived both time and tenderness. "You'll stay here, for as long as you need," he said. "I mean that." "Caleb," she started, but he cut her off gently. "I know you don't want to owe anyone, but this isn't about owing. It's about what people do for each other when the world doesn't. There's a specific kind of humility that comes with being rescued when you've been strong for too long." Sofia didn't argue. She simply nodded, lowered Isla into the crib Caleb had set up with sheets that still smelled like fresh cotton, and sat on the edge of the bed, her head bowed. In the silence that followed, something broke loose in her, something softer than grief, lighter than fear. It was the realization that she didn't have to run anymore. That evening, Sofia stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Caleb prepare a simple dinner: beans, cornbread, and roasted squash from the garden. He moved with quiet competence, sleeves rolled up, hair damp from an afternoon of work she hadn't seen, but could somehow feel in every careful movement. "You cook?" she teased, her voice still hoarse from exhaustion. "I survive," he answered with a smirk. "If I cook, people don't starve. That's the bar." They ate at the table near the window, Isla nestled in her arms, half asleep and content. No wine, no candles, just shared food and the kind of silence that only exists between two people who aren't trying to impress each other. At one point, Caleb looked up, his green eyes catching the last of the golden light. "You ever wonder what healing looks like?" he asked, mostly to himself. "I used to think it was a finish line. Now I think it's just this: a table, a quiet dinner, breathing." Sofia didn't respond. She couldn't. The lump in her throat made it impossible. Instead, she just looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she felt seen not as a project, not as a tragedy, but as a person worth sitting with. And maybe, just maybe, worth staying for. The days that followed didn't bring miracles, but they brought rhythm, and in Sofia's world, rhythm was its own kind of salvation. Morning sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, the sound of distant cattle rising with the fog, and Isla's coos blending with birdsong in the trees. This wasn't just recovery, it was rebirth in slow motion. Caleb didn't hover. He didn't try to fix things with flowers or speeches. He just made space. Each morning, Sofia would find fresh water in the kettle, a folded dish towel on the counter, and enough quiet to make her feel like she had room to exist again. And in that space, something strange happened. She started laughing, not often, not loudly, but genuinely. Once, when Isla managed to fling a spoonful of applesauce directly into Caleb's beard, Sofia laughed so hard she cried, and Caleb, wiping it off with a smirk, said, "Guess I'm not the only one feeding the livestock around here." It was the first time he'd called her family, even if he didn't know it. Sofia began helping around the ranch, not because she was expected to, but because it gave her something to offer. She collected eggs, folded laundry, helped organize the old tool shed that Caleb hadn't touched in years. And through it all, the unspoken current between them deepened. He watched her, not like someone admiring a guest, but like someone learning a language he hadn't heard in years. One day, while organizing seed bags in the barn, Caleb turned to her and said, "You know what I realized today? There's music again. Sofia looked confused. Music? Yeah, he nodded, brushing hay from his jeans. Laughter, voices, dishes clinking, a baby babbling. I didn't notice it was missing until it came back. That moment stayed with her, because it was the first time someone had told her, not just implied, but said outright, that her presence made things better, that she wasn't a burden. She was the music. That night, after Isla had fallen asleep curled in a quilt made decades before either of them was born, Sofia stepped outside to the porch. Caleb was there, rocking slowly, the stars above him like scattered silver on black velvet. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can't stop thinking," she said. "I keep waiting for the part where it all gets taken away again." Caleb didn't answer at first. He just looked up at the sky, like maybe the constellations held a better explanation than words ever could. Then he said, "I used to think healing meant returning to what was. But maybe it's just building something new, with what's left." Sofia looked at him, the porch light casting warm shadows across his face. "And what if what's left isn't enough?" "Then you borrow," he said, "until you can give again." The wind shifted, the rocking slowed, and for a few seconds, time stopped. Not in a movie way, not in a dramatic way, but in the kind of stillness where two people realize they're no longer just surviving beside each other. They're starting to live because of each other. And just before she turned to go back inside, Caleb said softly, "Sofia, I meant it. You're not alone anymore." And for the first time, she didn't question it. By the time the first frost hit Pine Hollow, the Monroe Ranch didn't just feel like home. It acted like one. There was rhythm now, not just in the routine, but in the connection. Sofia found herself reaching for Caleb's coffee mug in the morning without thinking, folding his shirts into the basket when she did laundry, and brushing flour off his cheek when they made cornbread together like it had always been her job. But it wasn't routine that changed everything. It was one moment, a moment so small most people wouldn't notice it. Sofia had just finished putting Isla down for a nap. She stepped into the hallway, barefoot, hair a mess, wearing one of Caleb's old flannel shirts she'd thrown on out of necessity. And there he was, standing at the end of the hallway, watching, not staring, not gawking, just witnessing. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes said everything. Wonder, recognition, fear. Because sometimes the scariest thing in the world is realizing you've fallen for someone who could make you feel again. That night, Sofia found herself out by the barn, wrapping the horses with their evening blankets. Caleb joined her, leaning on the fence, arms crossed. "Didn't know you had a thing for work that doesn't pay," he said with a teasing smile. "Didn't know you had a thing for not asking for help," she shot back, her tone matching his. They stood there, silence hanging like fog. And then, carefully, Caleb said, "You know, this isn't just a stopover. You could stay. I mean, really stay, if that's something you want." Sofia's heart skipped. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even an invitation in the traditional sense. But it was honest, vulnerable. And in Caleb's world, that was rare. "I'm not sure I remember how to stay," she replied softly. "Every place I've ever been felt temporary, like the clock was always ticking." "Maybe that's the difference," he said, "when you're not waiting for it to end. You just let it begin." That night, sleep didn't come easy. Not for either of them. Sofia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, heart thumping louder than the wind rattling the windows. Meanwhile, Caleb sat on the porch, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling beside him, lost in a memory. His wife's laugh, the weight of her hand in his, the quiet ache of watching her slip away. Loss, he realized, wasn't just about absence. It was about inertia, about the parts of you that stop moving when someone you love disappears. But Sofia had put motion back into his world. The next morning was clear, crisp, full of the kind of air that smells like a promise. Caleb found Sofia in the kitchen, baby on her hip, humming a tune that didn't have a name. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "There's something I want to show you." She looked up, curious. "Okay?" They walked past the barn, through a path that curved between the old oak trees. At the edge of the property stood a greenhouse, weather-worn, half-forgotten. Inside, vines curled along wooden beams, sunlight filtered through dusty panes, and the air smelled of rosemary and memory. "Lila built this," Caleb said, "before she got sick. Said it would be her safe place. But after she passed, I stopped coming out here." Sofia turned, eyes wide. "It's beautiful." "It's yours," he said, and the words dropped between them like an anchor. "You can grow whatever you want, or nothing at all. Just sit here, breathe." She looked at him, chest tightening with a swell of gratitude she couldn't express, because what he was really offering wasn't a greenhouse, it was space, permission, a life. "Thank you," she said, "for not treating me like someone broken." He smiled, that quiet, lopsided smile that always seemed to say more than words. "You're not broken. You're rebuilding. And there's nothing more powerful than that." Somewhere between winter's edge and the first whisper of spring, Sofia stopped looking for the exit. She no longer counted the days since she arrived at the ranch. She no longer whispered to herself that she'd leave when Isla got stronger. She no longer flinched when life felt stable. Instead, she made tea in the mornings, planted mint and chamomile in the greenhouse, taught Isla how to sit up by herself on the picnic blanket in the yard, and folded herself into Caleb's world without asking permission, because, in truth, he had already made space for her. But love, especially the kind born in the aftermath of grief, rarely unfolds in straight lines. It tiptoes in, and then it crashes. It was a windy Saturday, the kind where clouds galloped across the sky and the air smelled like rain but refused to fall. Sofia was on the porch tying back her hair, Isla in a jumper near her feet, gurgling and playing with a wooden spoon. Caleb had gone out early to check on a skittish bull that had broken a gate the night before. He hadn't come back. Not yet. And then came the sound. Hoofbeats pounding hard, shouts echoing across the fields, the screech of truck tires on dirt. Sofia ran to the edge of the porch. 2 ranch hands were sprinting toward her, panic in their eyes. "It's Caleb," one of them yelled. "The bull, he tried to lasso it, got thrown." The words didn't make sense at first. Thrown? What did that mean? "Where is he?" she screamed. "Where?" But they were already grabbing her, urging her toward the truck. She scooped up Isla, heart pounding, vision going white around the edges. When she reached the pasture, her knees buckled. Caleb lay in the grass, unmoving. Blood streaked one side of his head. His leg was bent wrong. The look on the ranch hand's face told her more than the injury ever could. "He's breathing," one whispered, "but barely." Sofia dropped to her knees beside him, one hand gripping Isla, the other trembling over his chest. "Caleb," she choked out, "please don't do this. Don't you dare leave me too." His lips moved slightly. No sound, just the twitch of a breath. The ambulance arrived in what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than minutes. Paramedics loaded him quickly, too quickly. "You'll need to follow," one said. But Sofia was already climbing in, Isla in her arms, jaw set with a kind of terror that had no name. At the hospital, the sterile light pierced her eyes. The scent of antiseptic felt personal now, as if it had followed her from the last time. Caleb was rushed into surgery, head trauma, fractured ribs, compound leg fracture. He may not wake up, one doctor said, his voice clinical, detached. You should be prepared. But Sofia had no space left for preparation. She only had fight and fear and love. Hours passed, maybe days. She never left his room, not to eat, not to sleep. Isla stayed curled against her chest, as if the child somehow understood that the only way to keep her mother from breaking completely was to stay close. And in that heavy silence, Sofia talked. To him, to herself, to the ceiling. I didn't come here looking for you, she whispered, forehead resting against his hand. But you found me anyway. And now you think you get to leave? After all this? Number, I won't let you. One night, when the world was completely still and even the monitors seemed to pause, she whispered something she'd never said before. Not to anyone since her husband passed, not even to herself. I love you, Caleb. She said it like a prayer, like a dare. I love you, and I don't want to lose you. Nothing happened. No twitch, no breath. Just the beep of the machine. She buried her face into his arm, sobbing as quietly as she could so Isla wouldn't stir. But then, a sound, barely more than a sigh. Sofia. Her head shot up, his eyelids fluttered, his mouth moved again. I love you too. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the second time in her life, Sofia collapsed. This time not from grief, but from the overwhelming relief of being allowed to hope again. Recovery wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. It was bruises turning yellow, stitches itching under bandages, and Caleb refusing to accept help even when his ribs screamed. But Sofia stayed. Not out of obligation, out of choice, out of the kind of love that doesn't need declarations. It just needs presence. She brought him tea before the nurses could, fluffed his pillow with one hand while balancing Isla on her hip with the other, and read aloud to him from an old Western novel she found in the hospital gift shop, even though he teased her relentlessly for how dramatically she did the cowboy voices. But the truth was, he loved every word, because hearing her voice, steady, strong, alive, was what reminded him he still had something to live for. He had someone to live for. He had two. The first time Caleb tried to stand and fell back against the bed, Sofia caught him. Not just physically, but emotionally. You're allowed to be weak, she said, brushing hair from his eyes. You've been strong for too long. I don't know how, he whispered. Then I'll teach you, she said. And that was the kind of love they shared. Quiet, grounded, less about fireworks and more about firewood. Built slowly, kept burning. The day he was discharged, the sun was high and hot, and the world felt like it had started spinning again. Sofia drove the truck this time, with Caleb in the passenger seat and Isla giggling in the back, waving a soft, plush cow one of the nurses had given her. When they reached the ranch, everything looked different. Not because the land had changed, but because they had. Caleb walked slowly, leaning on Sofia as they stepped onto the porch. You sure you want me back here? He asked, trying to play it off with a smirk. After all, I make terrible conversation when I'm not concussed. Sofia didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped in front of him, placed both hands on his chest, and said softly, This is where you belong. This is where we belong. That night, as Isla slept soundly in the next room, Sophia and Caleb sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, the stars overhead like tiny witnesses to something sacred. "You know what's strange?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "I used to think love was supposed to sweep you off your feet. Dramatic, overwhelming. But this feels like standing on solid ground." Caleb nodded slowly. "I used to think I was done, that I had my chance and lost it. But you were the second breath I didn't know I was holding out for." Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out something small and velvet. Sophia's breath caught. "Wait, what are you—" "Don't panic," he chuckled. "It's not that. Not yet." He opened the box to reveal a small silver pendant shaped like a leaf, simple and elegant. "You said once you always feel like you're waiting for everything to fall apart," he said. "So I got you something that reminds you that even when things fall, sometimes they land exactly where they're meant to." Her hands trembled as she took it, tears blurring her vision. "Caleb." He leaned in, kissed her forehead. "I'm not asking you for forever today. I'm just asking you to keep building this life with me, one day at a time." Sophia nodded, heart swelling. "Then yes, today, and tomorrow, and every day we're given." The wind rustled through the trees. The porch swing creaked. And for the first time since two broken people crossed paths by accident, or maybe fate, they weren't just surviving anymore. They were beginning. Spring came early that year, as if even the seasons couldn't wait to see what happened next. Wildflowers exploded along the fence lines of the Monroe Ranch. The air smelled of new rain and warm earth. And Isla took her first wobbly steps on a sun-drenched afternoon with a squeal that sounded like laughter and triumph rolled into one. Caleb was the first to catch her. Sophia was the first to cry. The three of them stood in the yard, wrapped in sunlight and soil, and if anyone had passed by just then, they would have sworn they were witnessing a family, not formed by blood, but by survival, by healing, by quiet, relentless love. But even happy stories have chapters where shadows return. One morning, while sorting old mail, Sophia found a letter, an eviction notice, dated 3 weeks before she had arrived at the ranch, her old apartment, a place she hadn't returned to, hadn't thought about, hadn't faced. Not because she forgot, but because she wasn't ready. She sat on the porch, holding the letter like it might catch fire in her hands. Caleb found her like that, his boots thudding softly on the wooden steps. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "I was supposed to be gone," she said finally. "My lease, my name, my life. It's all officially nowhere." Caleb sat beside her. "You're not nowhere. You're here." "But I don't own anything," she said, voice shaking. "I don't have a title, a plan. I just showed up, broken, and you gave me everything." Caleb turned toward her, green eyes steady. "You didn't take anything I wasn't offering. And you didn't show up broken. You showed up brave." She smiled bitterly. "It doesn't feel brave when you're starting from nothing." He nodded slowly, then reached for her hand. "Then let's build something new. Together. On purpose." That's the moment Sophia realized. You don't always get to choose the chapter where your story begins, but you do get to decide where you start calling it home. They walked the land that week, planning what would come next. Caleb showed her a stretch near the orchard. "What if we build a little addition here?" he said. "A space just for you. Your own name on the deed. Not because you need to prove anything, but because you deserve to know it's yours." "I don't want to take from you," she said, but he stopped her. "You're not taking, you're adding. That night they sat by the fireplace, Isla sleeping nearby, the flames reflecting in Caleb's eyes. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Anything. I never wanted kids after Lila. Didn't think I could handle it again. But now, when Isla laughs, it's like my heart remembers how to grow." Sofia wiped a tear from her cheek. "She's crazy about you, you know. Thinks you're magic." He smiled. "She's not wrong." The next day, Caleb took Isla to feed the chickens while Sofia sat under the willow tree near the barn, sketching out ideas in a notebook. Plants to grow in the greenhouse, ways to turn Caleb's extra produce into a little market stand. It wasn't about profit. It was about purpose. She was building something. They were building something. That weekend, Sofia cooked dinner for the whole ranch staff. Beef stew, fresh cornbread, and a lemon pie so tart it made Caleb flinch but ask for seconds. After the meal, Caleb stood up, cleared his throat, and raised a glass. "To Sofia," he said, "and to the miracle of second chances. Not just for her, for all of us." There was laughter, clinking glasses, smiles that stretched wider than they had in years. And in that moment, beneath a string of porch lights and a sky full of stars, the woman who once showed up barefoot, carrying a feverish child and nothing else, stood tall in the center of a home that had become hers, because she built it with her heart. And love, as it turns out, doesn't always knock. Sometimes it opens the door for you and waits until you're ready to walk through. Autumn painted Pine Hollow in burnt orange and rust red, the kind of beauty that whispered, "Things are changing, but you're still safe." On a brisk October morning, Isla took off, running across the yard wearing little boots 2 sizes too big and a denim jacket embroidered with wildflowers. Caleb chased after her, pretending to stumble, while Sofia leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. This was their new normal. Muddy boots, half-folded laundry, early mornings spent feeding chickens, and late evenings reading bedtime stories with one voice hoarse from the day and one tiny hand curled tight around her thumb. Love had snuck in quietly. It hadn't asked for permission. It had just stayed. But life always finds a way to remind you that even peace has milestones. And for Caleb, that moment arrived on Christmas Eve. Snow dusted the fields in soft layers. The barn lights twinkled with decorations, and the ranch crew gathered around a bonfire with mugs of cider and slices of gingerbread. It was Sofia's idea to make the holiday open to everyone who didn't have somewhere to go. "No one should be alone on a night that's about together," she said. Caleb watched her as she said it, the firelight catching the curve of her cheek, the resolve in her voice, and he knew it was time. As the party settled, Caleb cleared his throat, stepping onto the porch with Isla in one arm and a small velvet box in the other. The crowd quieted. Sofia looked up, her breath catching. "I don't have a speech," Caleb said, laughing nervously, "because you already know everything. You saw me at my worst. You carried me when I couldn't stand. You held my daughter like she was your own. And you reminded me that life doesn't end when you lose someone. Sometimes it just begins again in a different form." He knelt, slowly, carefully, and handed Isla to one of the ranch hands. Then he looked up at Sofia, green eyes bright. "I don't want to build this life without you, and I don't want Isla to grow up calling you anything but Mom." He opened the box, a simple ring, a promise. "Sofia Rivera, will you marry me?" The world blurred around her. She dropped her mug, ran to him, knelt too, laughing, sobbing, arms around his neck. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it. Every day, every hard part, every joy." The crowd erupted, Cheers, applause, even a few tears from the old ranch foreman who'd once said Caleb would never love again. But the loudest moment came not from the crowd, but from Isla, who shouted, "My family!" with a grin wide enough to stretch across the field. The wedding came in spring. Wildflowers replaced pews. The aisle was a dirt path between trees. Sofia wore a simple white dress with boots. Caleb wore his best flannel shirt and a smile so wide it outshone the sun. And when they said, "I do," it wasn't just a vow. It was a victory over grief, over loneliness, over all the days that told them they wouldn't make it. And in the end, they did more than make it. They created something new, something solid, something that didn't just survive the storm, it grew roots in it. Because love, real love, doesn't always show up with perfect timing or polished shoes. Sometimes it arrives in a truck on a cold night. Sometimes it kneels beside you in a hospital room. And sometimes it begins when you have absolutely nothing left except the courage to open the door and say yes. So what do we learn from Caleb and Sofia's story? That love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stay, the steady hand during the storm, the whispered, "I'm here," when you've stopped asking. And the greatest love stories? They don't start with fireworks. They start with survival and grow into something worth rebuilding your world around.